Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Hermitage Conversations. And as I've said many times, my name's Ajahn Cunda.
I'm Ajahn Kovilo.
And Nisabho.
And we're enjoying a pretty quiet time right now.
It was, but Ajahn Kovilo is leaving us.
Yeah, it's very sad.
This is going to be even more quiet.
It's just going to be two of us from now on. So we'll see. Maybe somebody else will appear, but I think the plan is just for two.
Ajahn Siddhanta will appear in a month and a half, 6 weeks.
6 weeks. But he won't be appearing on the live stream, according to him.
Oh, really? Okay.
That's right. He's on sabbatical.
Where are you going, Ajahn? Or why are you leaving, Ajahn Kovilo? Why are you leaving us?
Well, I'm doing a very unforced monk type thing. I'm going to university. I'm going to Buddhist University. It's Dharma Realm Buddhist University in Ukiah, California, which is close to Abhayagiri. It's actually, Dharma Realm Buddhist University is the university end of City of 10,000 Buddhas, which was the monastery started by Master Hua, who is the monk who offered the land for Abhayagiri. So there is this connection, but it's not really a thing for forced monks to go to university, but
I'm doing good things there.
I am.
Yeah.
I'm studying Pali and Sanskrit, and hopefully if I get a good basis, I will be studying hopefully Chinese next semester. And once I get more of a basis in Pali, and I think I've mentioned it to you and others, but it's really amazing when you have a teacher, who's a professional at what you're trying to learn, like how much that can warp speed your progress. I mean, I have said it before, I learned probably more in 4 months this past semester of Pali than I had in, 10 plus years at, 5 years at Abhayagiri of just self-study. So, new semester starts on Monday, and that's what I'll be doing.
And you might be staying a bit with Bhikkhu Bodhi in the summer as well.
That's the hope. Yeah, Bhikkhu Bodhi has said that will work, and I'm looking forward to that. So,
Do you find there's a similar quality with your, kind of having a teacher, like a, professor, with like more like our traditional meditation instructor, or just our teacher in general, like a preceptor?
It's a great question. I mean, I definitely do. I mean, I can't, overstate the benefits from living near Ajahn Pasano. I mean, it's definitely a more, specific and kind of, learning a language is, I mean, it's a hard thing to do, but it's a very circumscribed, it's a very concrete and discrete skill. Whereas when you're living with a teacher of the spiritual life, I mean, for monks and nuns, it's kind of like your teacher is teaching you how to live, basically. And
So there's a lot of observation too.
lots of observation, and I mean, I am getting that to some degree. My Pali professor Sean Kerr and Lauren Bausch are the two Pali Sanskrit professors at Dharma Realm Buddhist University, and they're just great people. They're Dhamma practitioners. They both got strong meditation practices, and they really have put in years and years of very diligent study into becoming proficient at their respective skills. Just seeing how much it really takes to become, proficient at Pali is, it gives me a new outlook on what that's like. I mean, just kind of, study from, as a hobby, is good. Not everybody has an intention to be able to read the suttas, thoroughly in the native or in the original language, but I do. I enjoy it, and not everybody has to do it, but for people who can, it's got lots of benefits. So,
Right. Go ahead.
Oh, just, I mean, I've seen that, since you're leaving, it's just good to recognize. I've really appreciated having Ajahn Kovilo here for that reason. He's really has read the Tripitaka or the Sutta Pitaka in Pali, and it's really a pleasure to be around someone who has that sort of study. And for those of you who have had a chance to, say, meet Bhikkhu Bodhi or these other practitioners that have really stressed the study of suttas in their lives, there's a quality to them after years of being immersed in those texts where it's almost as if they've been cleaned out by them. It's astounding. I think people can think that study, can sort of say it's apart from the practice, but it really, from what I've seen, people who really immerse themselves in these texts come away with something quite palpable. So Enamotana Ajahn Kovilo, it's been lovely to have you. We'll miss you, but good luck, and it's keep on with studying these good things as well, at least in my opinion.
Thanks, Venerables. It's been great to be with you, of course, and it's been great kind of tapping into the local white salmon community and the community online. Maybe just one connection between Pali study and Bhikkhu Bodhi to our focus today, mindfulness of the body, is this word nivata. Comes up in the Karaniya Metta Sutta, and it means, vata means wind, and ni is a prefix, which is like to go downwards, to kind of let down. So it's kind of like, in the word together, nivata, it's one word which means like humility or non kind of puff-uppedness, which is certainly a characteristic which I've seen with Bhikkhu Bodhi and P.A. Payutto in Thailand. It's like these very scholarly good monks, are also extremely humble. And the kind of non-airiness or non-kind of like puffed upness it's something you can feel in your body. And so that's the connection to our sutta, which is Majjhima Nikaya number 119, Mindfulness of the Body, Kaya Gata Sati Sutta.
Before we move on to that, would not that we want to get the spotlight on you, but was this thing today's special or tomorrow's special in some way? Ajahn Chunda, would you want to?
Yes, it involves another Ajahn, our most venerable teacher, Ajahn Chah. So I think many of you might know that. Today in Thailand, actually, it's happening. We'll be looking at Ajahn Chah, and it's his birthday, right? That's what we have, the 16th.
Memorial of his passing.
Sorry, the memorial of his passing.
Close.
Well, birth. Hopefully there wasn't any birth involved in that. It's January 16th. All right. So anyway, back to I love the fact that we're live. Yeah. So it's the sort of commemoration of his death, and that was largely a year after that. That was. Between Lumpur Liam and Lumpur Pasano, actually, there was an effort between the two of them to actually orchestrate his funeral, knowing that funerals in Thailand can actually be kind of a little bit chaotic. They can. There's just so many people involved, and there's such a sort of almost religious fervor around it that there needed to be some emphasis on how to actually do it right. And so, quite beautifully. There was a merging of the West and the East with Lumpur Liam and Lumpur Pasano spearheading that, and that happened many years ago now, 1992, I think 93 right. was a year after that. So, yeah, that turned out to be quite a very special occasion. Even though through all of that planning, during the funeral pyre, when they ended up burning Ajahn Chah, I think the actual
chimney.
stupa that kind of caught on fire. Yes. The fire went so high, but everything worked out in the end, and it was quite a beautiful ceremony. So that's what we'll be commemorating tomorrow, and today in Thailand. There's usually a very large number of monks, usually a few thousand coming together, and
maybe 10,000
lay people kind of tenting out and living in the forest of Apapong Monastery for a week. And then they have quite a special event. Well, actually, it's ongoing. It's over several days, but they put up these food tents and food tables. So the 10,000 lay people over there, maybe not that many. The people who are actually staying there and sponsoring these food tents and tables just put out enormous amounts of food for everyone, not just the monks, but for
free.
Everyone there, and it's all free.
Yeah.
There's no charge. So it's quite a beautiful occasion. There's a lot of merit making and happiness.
Yeah, and lots of formal meditation practice. I mean, there's senior monks giving. This is basically happened, as I understand it, like every year since Ajahn Chah passed away. Of course, with his actual funeral being the biggest occasion, where you had like over the course of a week, 1 million people kind of streaming in through a bike, through Wat Nong Papong, and then every
King
year.
and Queen, I think.
King and Queen, Longdam Mahabua,
Yeah.
P.A. Payuto, Longpu Ban. But then every year since, people getting together to practice meditation and living together. And I mean, it's not easy living. People are living in tents for, a week. And
Gloats, the monks are kind of put out as well, right? Out into the forest.
Yeah.
The ones who normally live there
Yeah.
sometimes are either... there's kuti, or there's a lot of monks staying in one kuti. So there might be like 10
Yep.
monks in one kuti.
And probably this year this is not happening as it usually does.
correct.
Yeah.
This is just the usual commemoration is this thing, and I've been there several times, and it's one of those beautiful things I've ever seen. It's just thousands of people gathered for a single purpose, and one night, I think it would be tomorrow night in Thailand, is the night of his passing. Everyone stays up all night listening to Dhamma talks, and to stay up meditating and walking with 10,000 plus people. I mean, maybe not all of them are staying up, but a few thousand are. It's astounding. So if you ever get a chance to go, it's worth it. And it's a good chance to recollect our teacher who ushered in all of so much of what we've been given,
And I remember that I actually sent my brother to go. I wasn't there, and he met with Ajahn Yaniko and Tonsam Vijano.
And your cousin.
And then my cousin
Right.
spent like half a day with you.
That's right. I
July.
forgot about that.
Not my cousin, my nephew.
Oh.
He spent half a day with you, kind of walking around and getting to know the place. And both of them were like, that was the highlights of their trip, so they really, really enjoyed it.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Do either of you know what they call an occasion where during COVID time you've got 10,000 people coming together to emanate metta? If this were to happen, it doesn't.
An infection?
Super spreader. A super spreader event.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Monk jokes.
Forgive me. It's my last
Spread
day.
the Dhamma,
Yeah.
not COVID.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
do we want to go into the sutta or go into one of these questions first? What would be best?
We've talked about the sutta quite a bit and got into several different topics. Could also talk about questions either way. I think it's interesting. One of the things that didn't come up was just the question, well, what is mindfulness anyway? And it's interesting because you can ask that question to many different practitioners, and they can have a different sense of what it is. Because for each of us, we're going to describe it in our own words. But hopefully those words are kind of circling around each other and part of the same whole.
It's a good point.
I think. Yeah.
Do you want to, I think I would find it enjoyable or interesting to find out if the three of us wanted to, how we see mindfulness, maybe in relation to mindfulness of the body, if that was
Yeah,
a
well,
subset.
Yeah, sure. I think one of the things that you often hear about it. I mean, one of the definitions Ajahn Jeff said is bringing a wholesome object to mind. So that's sort of more just a simple, straightforward approach. Is like holding something in one's mind that's wholesome, not that's unwholesome, which would be sort of like wrong sati, wrong mindfulness. And so I think that's correct, but I don't know if it fleshes out actually what mindfulness is. And one of the things that we hear very often is be here now, and that's often an explanation of mindfulness as well. Is like just to be present, to be in the moment. But like a really happy cat or whatever can be in the moment. Can just be completely concentrated and there and present. Even you could say wrong mindfulness, about to jump and kill a mouse. It's very concentrated, very present. It's not thinking about other things.
Yeah.
So when we're mindful, we're not actually proliferating. There's not as much thought. But I think the cornerstone is the sampajanya element as well. Is you have to have clear comprehension. You have to have this sense of like what it is you're doing while you're doing it. So it's one of the phrases I heard quite early on in my practice, which is, if you know you're sitting, then you're actually meditating. But if you don't know you're sitting and you're sitting there meditating and you don't even know that you're sitting there meditating, then you're not there. So you have to actually know that. that quality of like kind of like what is it I'm doing actually right now, you know, when I'm flexing my arm, when I'm breathing in, breathing out, I know that these things are actually occurring for me, because one can be present with it, but there's not that kind of super awareness or meta awareness or kind of an understanding of like what's actually happening while you're doing it. And then there's a third element, which is that you can be doing both of those things quite well, but then you're quite irritated, or you're kind of wanting something in the back, you're sort of wanting, or you're just lost, you kind of, what do I do, I'm not sure. And that's the fact that we can still be tainted with, you know, with greed, hatred, and delusion. And so we have to also be aware of like, it's not just like this knot in my knee that I'm focusing on. I know I'm aware of it, I can feel it, I'm experiencing it, I'm in the here and now, but but I still wish it wasn't there. And with that still wish it wasn't there, you want to kind of, you know, move with that, understand that, and clarify that. So it's not just a sense of kind of being present, and it's not only just a sense of being aware of what it is you're doing. And even with both of those, we're doing something, observing, which is like not what an animal is actually doing, observing what it is that we're doing. We have to actually look at what the present state of our mind is. So holding all of those things in mind with mindfulness, I think, is my idea of like the bigger picture of what mindfulness is. You're carrying those things. Anyway.
Yeah. No. I think the holding something in mind, the Ajahn Jeff description is very helpful. And to flesh that point out, I think he specifically points to the fact that if you look at the wheel of dependent origination, there's a huge number of factors that come before sensory contact. And that basically just illustrates the fact that when we come into any situation, whether it's in our own meditations or externally, we come with a lot of agendas, desires, the mind's being primed for this or that. And depending on how we prime it, it's going to really affect how that sensory contact hits us and what we're inclined to do. So, you know, if we're looking for trouble or in an aversive mind state, I'm sure we've all had this experience of just being grumpy, and we'll find something to be grumpy about no matter what the sensory contact is that comes at us. You know, and so I think one of the best definitions I've heard around Ajahn Jeff is, you know, to point to the fact that the Four Noble Truths, knowing or not knowing them, is the essence of ignorance or knowledge at the beginning of the chain of dependent origination. Ignorance is ignorance of the Four Noble Truths in terms of an applied skill. Knowledge is knowledge and skillfulness in applying the Four Noble Truths in those categories to any experience we have. So in terms of what we hold in mind coming into any situation or sensory experience, the basic framework of the Four Noble Truths being what we bring, and holding those in mind, and knowing when encountering any situation which of the Four Noble Truths need to be applied and which of those duties need to be applied. So just to review, you know, for the first Noble Truth isn't some ontological statement like life is suffering. It's saying suffering is to be comprehended. The second Noble Truth is not, you know, just the origin of suffering, but rather the origin of suffering is to be abandoned. The third Noble Truth is the cessation of suffering is to be realized. And the fourth Noble Truth is the path to that cessation is to be developed. So in every situation, whether it's our internal meditation or an external situation, really seeing which of these truths should I be applying at this time? Like, is this mind state skillful? Should I develop it, or should it be abandoned? And that can be applied to external situations as well. Like, is this friendship something that at this point I want to be developing and really giving energy to, or is it something I can be drawing back from and abandoning slightly? You know, and I think that definition of mindfulness really, it was very comprehensive and simple, but I liked it. The ability to hold the Four Noble Truths and their incumbent duties in mind, approaching any situation. And that if we do that in the Samaditi Sutta, Sariputta says that wherever you apply the Four Noble Truths in the chain of dependent origination, it dissolves the whole chain immediately. So wherever we find ourselves in that, chain of desire, craving, birth, death, on a daily basis, if we manage to approach one of those mindful moments with right mindfulness, namely these Four Noble Truths, and really do it well, then it can really dissolve everything immediately. So I've appreciated that definition of mindfulness, and I think the looking at the body in this way can be used in many of those situations, but certainly it's part of the path and developing the path. Kovilo, what are your thoughts?
I appreciate hearing the Venerables, thinking about mindfulness in terms of the Four Noble Truths and the various different aspects that you mentioned, Ajahn. One way which Bhante Analayo kind of summarizes the practice of mindfulness or right mindfulness is like a 4-word kind of injunction, which is to keep calmly knowing change. So keep is the element of ardor, the element of you put effort into this practice. Calmly is like what you mentioned, Ajahn Chunda, of it's not letting the mind tilt in the direction of greed or anger. To know is kind of either to know the Four Noble Truths or to know your object. In this case, we're talking about the body. And then change is, just pointing out to the ephemeral and transient nature of whatever our object is. And I thought that was a great summary by Bhante Analayo. Keep calmly knowing change.
The acronym isn't as snappy as some of yours, but it's workable.
True.
And knowing is also, that's the sati sampajanya, the sampajanya, element of it.
Exactly. So like if you break that down into the 4 Pali words which come up in the definition of right effort, you've got atapi, which is the keep, which is the effort. Calmly is the abandoning abhijja, domanassa, greed and distress. You've got knowing is sati, and change is the sampajanya.
Because it can seem quite easy, like basic on the surface of what like what it is that you're looking at. Just sort of if I'm just here now, just kind of enjoying the moment. Some people talk about being in a flow or something like that. But that's where I think that can kind of confuse things, because if you just think about your experiences just like the flow of like I was absorbed in painting this painting, it was so beautiful, and all of a sudden 5 hours later it was it was over. One can kind of be present in something like that, so you're really present, but you're not really experiencing, and not even kind of observing or analyzing or understanding what's actually going on there. It's sort of like I think that it can be quite an experience to be present, but without kind of, as we're talking about, knowing what's going on, keeping in mind like the Four Noble Truths, keeping in mind what it is that we're doing, just that it misses the observing knowledge, the sort of sense of like analysis and what is the Buddha's teaching. We have to kind of keep that in mind, that what are we really trying to understand here.
I always like the analogy, sort of like you're saying, of having also part of you stepping back, looking at the whole picture. It's like you can be very mindful of sweeping, but just keep an eye on where the back of the broom is,
In Thailand, there are long brooms.
Yeah, it's very long. So this is, so sati is sweeping, but the sampajanya is knowing where the back of your broom is and if it's going to hit someone. So I thought that was kind of nice.
Tangambiro made a broom at Abhayagiri it's like 12 feet long.
I've definitely almost whacked people before, without a doubt, with the backside. So.
Yeah, that goes with that whole idea of the example of Ajahn Chah, where he said a senior teacher was, walking in front of him, and this teacher was known as being very, very, had a lot of sati. He had a lot of mindfulness, and so when he was walking in front of him, and I think he was visiting the monastery, he wasn't living there, and so they were on alms round, and this monk who had a lot of sati would start all of a sudden leading the group of monks. He was in the front into like a rice field, because he was very present with his one foot in front of the other and what was going on, and then, or he'd be going to the left side of the road, but all of the people who were offering food were on the right. And Ajahn Chah eventually had to start kind of saying behind him, like, left, right. And so that's another good illustration, I think, where it's like if you can be quite, present with just what it is that you're doing, but you don't know what's going on. You're not really aware of an experience. I had an experience like that where in the Dhamma hall, people were meditating, and there was a woman who was having a psychotic break in the back, and you could hear this. I kind of had walked in the room, and there were other practitioners. Just there were no monks present, but the other practitioners were just sitting through this, and I had to turn on the light and just kind of get people, okay, meditation's over. Can people clear the room out, so we could help this woman? And it was just sort of. It struck me that several of the people just weren't that aware of what was going on in the room. I don't think they were, stuck in jhana or anything, because I roused them pretty quickly. But it's sort of that knowing, there wasn't a sense of like, knowing, oh, maybe I should be doing something, or maybe, maybe just because this is a meditation room, it doesn't mean that you always meditate in it at a particular time, So yeah, it was just like, okay, what's the right thing to be done here? What is one aware of? The knowledge of just being able to know what should I do right now? What's appropriate?
Yeah, definitely.
I'm not sure if it'd be helpful to delve in. We've had some questions from people, and I think the first one we were talking about. This comes back to. Kind of a person who had read Wisdom Over Justice, which is a Ajahn Jeff essay, where he said social change should be presented as a joyous opportunity for expressing good qualities of the heart. To borrow an expression from the canon, those qualities are best promoted by embodying them yourself and by speaking in praise of how those practices will work for the long-term benefit of anyone else who adopts them. So does that mean we are to praise the good but not criticize the bad, like fomenting violence? And then there's so that's that first question. Sorry, and the other questions after that. So again, this is around like what is it that we want to properly do in terms of helping the world, being out in the world. And so just so there's some clarity around that from last week's or last Tuesday's discussion, I think there can be an emphasis sometimes for monks. We want to be sort of basically apolitical. We don't want to get involved politically, and that's because we want to pretty much promote how we want to be approachable by everyone, so that it's not as if like we are pro-Republican and then we shun the Democrats or vice versa, because then that really blocks off the Dhamma for certain people who might want to have access to it. But we always are for peace and care and change. And I would also say that means that for lay people there might be a slight difference there in the fact that it doesn't mean that one doesn't then, one says, well, I should just live like a monk and be in a monastery all the time. There are ways to promote social justice and be out in the world and be helping people. So, but I'd like to hear what you both had to say in terms of this, praising the good and not criticizing the bad. Either of you had.
Well, I listened to this talk by Ajahn Nisabho, The Wisdom Over Justice. I didn't read the essay, the accompanying essay, but he made some interesting points. I wasn't struck by this point that he was perhaps suggesting that it's more a matter, justice is more a matter of cultivating the good, although he does certainly push that. He's basically highlighting three types of merit as being the positive forms of justice. So he's suggesting that generosity, keeping of precepts, and cultivation of loving kindness are basically a Buddhist form of positive justice. And in the essay, he does, kind of eschew the negative end of what often is labeled justice in America, or the pursuit of justice in the English language. But I mean, just knowing Ajahn Thanissaro myself, and he definitely won't shy away from, if someone's doing something which is inappropriate. And the same with the Buddha, the same with Ajahn Chah, the same with Luang Man. If someone's doing something which is inappropriate, the Buddha himself would not shy away from criticizing that person, and would find the one essential point to remember is finding the right time and place. Like the Buddha was ever conscious, mindful of when is the right moment to speak to someone, whether it's praise or blame. One of the people who's on our alms round, they suggested a really interesting practice which I'd never heard of before. So as monks, we have to ask, if we're going to criticize or kind of offer feedback to someone, we ask permission beforehand. Can I offer feedback to the Venerable? And I think we have to get an affirmative answer before we continue. Mm-hmm. But this kind of couple on our alms round suggested actually that they have a practice of asking permission before offering positive feedback as well, which is interesting to think about, because I know some people are mistrustful of positive feedback, and so I'm going to experiment with that. But that's just some ideas about praise and blame and how it how it relates to justice, or Buddhist sense of justice. What are your thoughts?
You have my continued permission to praise me, Ajahn Kovilo.
Okay.
You too, Ajahn
Just
Cunda.
Without
Always.
permission? All the
It's
time?
just always.
Okay.
Do you want my permission?
So, I think that's a really good point. Like that the Buddha was, there's a place for looking critically and discerning in the world, and just because we try not to be judgmental doesn't mean we aren't judicious. But also to see, the right time and place. For example, the Buddha never criticized other teachers by name to lay people when he was giving Dhamma talks. And that's, it's interesting, these skillful means and these distinctions. And, for me, I think the essence of appropriate attention doesn't mean only looking at the good. I think it really can involve looking at qualities of difficulty in the world, but once again, to look at those with right mindfulness. And if we see something that is really problematic, to be willing to delve into it deeply and look at what conditioned it. And the Buddha said in Anguttara 883 that all things have their origin in feeling. And I think that speaks back to the first noble truth, in that if you trace back all these difficulties, all these acts of violence, all these really things that really are worthy of criticism or worthy of looking skeptically at, if you trace back what gave rise to them, usually you can find the initial wound or the initial trauma, and that goes on a societal level and a personal level. And if you really did understand what conditioned everyone's neuroses and problems, if you understood what they'd been through as a child or something, that compassion opens from that spot of the first noble truth and tracing things back to that. So I think that's a skillful means in terms of not stopping at a surface level anger, but really tracing things back to the feeling that gave rise to what we're seeing and looking for the compassionate approach from there. And just that, I think as practitioners, we have a high bar in that we can look at the world in a discerning way, but we never get to buy into believing that any act undertaken in anger is absolutely correct. Every action that is done, and we do need to interact with the in the world, but all those actions can be done through loving kindness and with a loving mind, and they're more powerful because of that. And just pointing to obvious, almost cliche examples of these at this point, of Desmond Tutu, of Mother Teresa, of the Dalai Lama. I mean, these were not people whose actions were compromised by not having anger. And I think this is a good, looking carefully at how much, say, news we're taking in, or how we're interacting with these issues is, are we taking enough time in our practice to maintain that state of equanimity and loving kindness? Because if we're not, and if our internal dialogue is becoming shrill and self-righteous, then we're not going to be able to affect much change. But if we are making sure to maintain our center, then all external action is potentized. So I'd say that that's just an important bar for us to set as practitioners. We can look at things in the world that are problematic, but not to let them give rise to even one unwholesome mind state if we can.
Can I offer some thoughts that provokes? Is like, I think you're right. I remember Ajahn Tanisaro pointing out in a different essay about that fact that the Buddha would not criticize these other teachers, like to lay people. Although if he was in conversation with monks, he would mention these teachers by names and their kind of doctrines and beliefs, which were kind of harmful in different ways. But as you said that, it brought to mind, like, actually, I don't think that the Buddha ever, either to monks or to lay people, like, criticized the kings.
Yeah.
There are, there were kings at the time of the Buddha, King Pasenadi, King Bimbisara, who he had, very, close relationships with, going and talking with these monarchs on a regular basis. And, he would not criticize their actions. There were times when he praised, say, the Lichavis, which were a democratic government, and saying, when the Lichavis, if there's any kind of government or any body who meet, body, as in like a group of people that meet frequently and meet in peace and assemble in peace and disperse in peace, then they'll last for a long time. So he's praising that, but he doesn't, and I'd love it if someone could point out.
I think there was one where I think it was King Pasenadi, who maybe it wasn't King Pasenadi, killed his father.
King Ajatasattu.
Ajatasattu. And then he said that when he was teaching Ajatasattu, Ajatasattu left, and then he said to the monks who were present, he would have actually realized the Dhamma if he had not committed this offense of killing his father. So, in a way, it wasn't like it was kind of a critical approach to what he had done in his life. By carrying out this action, the result was that he wasn't able to realize the Dhamma, and actually he would die without being able to penetrate the Dhamma because of that action.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I mean, that was when he mentioned that he was just talking to the monks, and there is kind of like a in-group, out-group, making public pronouncements versus kind of in-house kind of declarations, which are easier to speak on with nuance. But I'm going to look into this personally, and if anybody else has any other insights, I'd be interested to hear. One other thing, though, is that just like, the Buddha didn't say the first noble truth is some type of external oppression. The first noble truth is the suffering that kind of we create for ourselves. There are two arrows. There's the arrow from the pain which we receive from the outside, but then the more important arrow is the arrow which we then, stab into ourselves after that first, oppressive pricks from the outside, is the pain that we cause ourselves, and that's an internal process. It's like internal versus external locus of control. And so much talk about politics is fetishizing, basically, the external locus of control, and really giving, and of course, not to diminish, the function and the terrible, comic, acts which, beings, and especially beings in power, kings, ministers, presidents, can kind of elicit. But really, like, I think the voice of, of monastics and the voice of the Buddha is really kind of more angling, towards the internal locus of control. So,
and also I think, as I was mentioning before, like looking at like actions versus then like the personhood, because you often when we're kind of examining like what it is that we experience, and when we're thinking about another person, or we were talking about this, not criticizing the bad, like yeah, it's important to we're saying, be critical of the bad, but you're not criticizing the person, you're criticizing the actions.
Critically important.
And to just completely focus on a person, like, so and so is evil, look at all this stuff that he's done or she's done, and we should punish that person, we should put them away, they should never be allowed to have this job again, or whatever it is. That's quite unfortunate, and it's one of the reasons why the prison system has so many problems, our punitive system, judicial system. When you just look at actions of people, it also depersonalizes, and it does take that anger away, because then what arises when you look at actions that are critical, that are bring up a lot of negativity and unwholesomeness, you then have the arising of compassion. So when compassion's there, then we can say, oh, that there's a wish for that person to be better, to engage in more skillful actions. So that's something that's often forgotten. We just focus on the person rather than that. Well, it's their actions, their activities, and you can see how one action can beget another and another and another, and then unfortunately that becomes a solidifying for us of who and what that person is, rather than just a bunch of bad activities. So we kind of want to encourage each other towards the good, discourage ourselves from engaging in the bad, but surely not to condemn a being, their whole being, for what they are.
That's good, Ajahn. And do you think, do you want to address this last question before we sign off, since it'll bring it back to the body as well?
Yeah.
So the question is, did the Buddha speak, the questioner sort of goes into a bit about her work with stress, and especially specifically in the body, and then asks, did the Buddha speak about the effect of the body on the mind, or the effect of the mind on the body?
We were talking about this earlier, if you want to.
Yeah, I mean, well, some kind of connection is just seen by the Pali words, which you see in many different situations, nama, rupa, which can be translated as name and form, or mind and body. Basically, rupa is body or form, and nama are the mental aspects of our experience. So it's a compound. These things come together. It's they're tied in the language itself, and I think anybody who's been practicing for any length of time, you see that connection. I know certainly with people who have started or have done like Goenka retreats, where one's main meditation focus is feelings within the body, you really intimately see that connection between what your mind's doing and what your body's doing. The anger that you're feeling, expresses itself as tension in the face, or the anxiety you're feeling expresses itself, manifests itself, contributes to, is both a cause and an effect of the anxiety that is the mental aspect of yourself. And there are these feedback loops, which the questioner is pointing to. Another great quote, I think this is Tara Brach, is that our issues are in our tissues, basically. So it's like the dukkha that we're looking at, it is both physical and mental. And I think actually, though, that like the extent to which that connection is there has really been fleshed out in a lot of modern books, which the Venerables have mentioned recently. The one,
well, there's one called "The Body Keeps the Score," but for me, I haven't actually read that, and for me, a lot of what you're speaking to is fleshed out in the Anapanasati Sutta, actually. The Sutta of the mindfulness of breathing, basically. And, for those familiar with this sutta, there's 4 tetrads, basically, which are steps related to different aspects of breath meditation. And the sutta aligns beautifully with the Satipatthana Sutta of the 4 foundations of mindfulness. So the 4 foundations being beginning with the body, then moving to mindfulness of feelings, then mindfulness of mind, and then mindfulness of Dhamma categories. And they overlay these steps of breath meditation. And so I think it's very significant that the Buddha begins having meditators work with their body, and specifically knowing the breath length, calming the breath, calming what he calls bodily sankharas, which is explicitly the breath, but also perhaps related to these sort of knots in the internal breath body that associate with trauma. And then when these things become calm, then rapture and pleasure begin to arise in the second tetrad, or feelings. So here you have an explicit connection between the calming and relaxing of the body and the bodily formation, and the sudden availability of this resonance and flow of good sensation that is the natural kind of birthright of a body that's relaxed and at ease. And then these feelings serve as a basis, especially when sort of applied with certain perceptions. And the Buddha has analogies that he aligns with each of these steps around lotuses growing in cool ponds, etc., which I think are perceptions that are very beautiful, but they're very explicitly supposed to work on this process. So they're perceptions that are being applied to the body, and they affect the body in that way. But then once the feelings begin to sort of circulate, then that affects the mind in the third tetrad, where the mind becomes bright, concentrated, and liberated. So here you have a very explicit trellis of the Buddha speaking about how you use perception through this breath to influence and calm the body, how this leads to a well-being in terms of feelings, and how this in turn affects the quality of the mind. So for me, there's that very clear and detailed way the Buddha lays it out in a practical way. This is how rupa affects nama. And then, of course, this isn't totally linear. Like, these things have feedback, and in turn, these perceptions affect how the body, and I'm sure we've all experienced that as you become calm or spread loving kindness, the body also becomes calm. So for me, the Buddha spoke a lot about the effect of the body and the mind and the mind and the body in just that sutta and elsewhere.
Yeah, and I think it's also up for investigation. One of the easiest ways to see this is just through your own practice. If you're essentially becoming more tense and your body is getting, worse through your activity of mind, of just being present, just sitting down to meditate, for example, then you're probably, if that's progressively happening, you're probably not doing things correctly. So you want to look at actually how it is that you're meditating, how it is you're examining your own experience. I do know that sometimes people, when they think of concentration, for example, that it can be this sort of heavy, tight experience of how we're looking at what we're seeing, and instead, this is more of a calming, relaxing, a sense that being at ease, and that's what we're developing in our meditation. The jhana factors, for example, that when you hear about the words the Buddha's talking about, there's like rapture and happiness, and it's really a letting go. It's really a pleasant experience that one's happening. This doesn't mean that the unpleasant doesn't occur in our practice of kind of understanding the mind, whether we're sitting or walking, whatever it is we're doing. But it does mean that we have the potential to meet the unpleasant with a calmness in our own body. And so that's important to remember, and to see, to kind of really investigate if one is feeling a lot of pain and difficulty in meditation, then to really explore that and see, well, what's really going on here, and how can I actually use what it is that I'm doing to calm the body and free it of sort of sometimes the pain that we're experiencing. So with that, it's
before we go, actually, Ajahn Kovilo, someone requested one of your comics.
Right,
May I paste one of them, or should we?
Sure.
Yeah, is that all right? Okay.
So we're gonna paste one.
Does this work?
Ajahn Kovilo's.
I don't know if it
Can you
works.
do that?
I don't know if we can do it. Oh no, we can't do it. I wanted to post one of Ajahn Kovilo's monastic comics. They're very wholesome.
This can be found.
Not without a password, I can't.
Oh, all right.
So.
Never mind.
Too bad.
Sorry.
If you all ordain as monastics, there's
Yeah,
a monastic website.
Monastics.
Monastics, right.
Monastics can get entrance.
And I'm sorry we didn't get to answer all the questions, by the way. I know there was some coming up. So
Yeah.
we will keep those in mind and try to see if we can speak to them next time
Yeah,
as well.
if people actually can remember what they asked last time and on the chat, then we'll try to answer some of those as well. But this is a heartfelt goodbye to our friend. Hopefully not permanent goodbye.
Hopefully not permanent goodbye.
But, these things are always met with the potential for permanence. Goodbye forever.
Goodbye forever.
So
Yeah.
wishing Ajahn Kovilo well. Happy you spent the last, is it 5 weeks you've been here?
Something about that, yeah.
And
6.
yeah, it's been really nice having him here. Ajahn Kovilo and I have spent many of our formative years together.
That's right. Totally formative.
When we were beginning, I was a Samanera, I think.
Yeah.
and you
There's
came
some good
later.
stories you hear between the two of them.
I don't know
I'm
if
not sure
they're-
we can go into them
if
here,
they're
but
good.
it's pretty funny.
They're interesting and entertaining. But yeah, it's been great living with you again, because it's been quite a long time.
It has.
And it's
Well-
always, go ahead.
One theme in our relationship is loving kindness,
Yeah.
which ties nicely into your next live stream next Tuesday,
That's right.
next week. Will be the theme of loving kindness and the loving kindness sutta, which Nisabho just posted.
And
And
the sutta.
yeah, I hope I can join you. Maybe I'll silently be in the background watching you guys
All right, very good.
next week.
Very good.
We'll miss him, and so yes, it's been good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you're great, Venerables, and it's good to see everybody here. And we'll see you. Well, they'll see you next week.
6:30 p.m. Tuesday.